Have you ever wondered why some people remain stuck in the same place despite all their prayers and faith? Why do some deeply spiritual individuals struggle financially while others seem to prosper with apparent ease? The answer might surprise you, and it's something Pope John Paul II understood deeply. Today, we're going to explore 5 spiritual mistakes that could be blocking your prosperity right now. Mistakes that this beloved Pope warned us about throughout his pontificate. Imagine waking up every day feeling that disconnect between your spiritual life and your material reality. You pray, you attend services, you try to live righteously, yet financial stability and overall well-being seem to be just beyond your reach. There's a missing piece in this puzzle, and today we'll discover exactly what it is. The relationship between spirituality and prosperity isn't just about money. It's about creating a life of abundance in every area, including your health, relationships, and yes, your finances too. Pope John Paul II taught us that true prosperity flows when we align our spiritual practices with divine wisdom. Before we dive into these 5 critical mistakes, let me tell you a story about Maria. Maria was a dedicated woman of faith who spent 2 hours each day in prayer. Her spiritual life was rich and meaningful, yet she constantly struggled with debt, had recurring health issues, and couldn't understand why God wasn't answering her prayers for stability. Her stress affected her sleep, which worsened her health problems, creating a vicious cycle that seemed impossible to break. One day, while reading some of Pope John Paul II's teachings on work and human dignity, she discovered something that changed everything. Work is a good thing for man, he wrote, because through work, man not only transforms nature, adapting it to his own needs, but he also achieves fulfillment as a human being. This sparked a profound realization for Maria. Perhaps she had been making some fundamental spiritual mistakes that were blocking the prosperity God intended for her. I'd like to take a moment to invite you to be part of our community. If you're finding value in these insights, please consider subscribing to our channel and activating the notification bell so you never miss our new videos. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section. Where are you watching us from, and how have these spiritual principles affected your life? Your experiences enrich our entire community. The first spiritual mistake that blocks prosperity is separating your faith from your daily work. Pope John Paul II emphasized repeatedly that work is not just a necessary burden, but a participation in God's creative activity. Maria realized she had been seeing her job as something separate from her spiritual life, something she did merely to pay bills while waiting for God to bless her financially through some miraculous intervention. In his encyclical Laborem Exercens, Pope John Paul II wrote about the dignity of work and how our labor is meant to be an expression of our spiritual values. When we compartmentalize our lives, keeping our faith in church and our work at the office, we create an artificial division that blocks the flow of prosperity. True abundance comes when we bring our spiritual values into everything we do. Maria began approaching her work differently, seeing it as a sacred opportunity to express her faith through excellence and integrity. Within months, her supervisor noticed this change, and she received a promotion that eased her financial strain. But more importantly, her sense of purpose and fulfillment grew immensely as the artificial walls between her spiritual and work life came down. The second spiritual mistake is misunderstanding the nature of material goods. Many spiritual people feel guilty about wanting financial stability or material comfort. They misinterpret religious teachings about detachment to mean that poverty is somehow more virtuous than prosperity. This misunderstanding creates a subconscious resistance to receiving abundance. Pope John Paul II taught a more balanced view. In Centesimus Annus, he acknowledged that material goods and wealth are not evil in themselves, What matters is how we acquire them and what we do with them. He warned against both materialistic consumerism and the rejection of legitimate material needs. Prosperity becomes problematic only when it leads to greed or when material goods become our primary focus. Maria had always felt guilty about wanting financial security, believing her spiritual path required embracing poverty. But as she studied these teachings, she realized that responsible stewardship of resources, including money, was actually part of her spiritual calling. She could desire prosperity without compromising her values, especially if that prosperity enabled her to be more generous and effective in helping others. With this new understanding, Maria started a small savings account and began eliminating unnecessary expenses. She approached her finances with the same prayerful attention she gave to her spiritual practices. Slowly but steadily, her financial situation improved and her anxiety about money diminished. This reduced stress had an immediate positive impact on her health, particularly her sleep quality and blood pressure. The third spiritual mistake is neglecting your physical health in the name of spirituality. Throughout his papacy, Pope John Paul II demonstrated deep respect for the human body. He taught that our physical bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit and that caring for them is a spiritual responsibility, not a worldly distraction. Many spiritual people like Maria focus so intensely on spiritual disciplines that they neglect proper nutrition, exercise, and rest. They might skip meals to pray longer or ignore health issues while serving others. Pope John Paul II, however, showed us a different way. Even as his health declined in later years, he maintained as active a lifestyle as possible and accepted medical care while continuing his spiritual mission. Maria had been ignoring her health issues, considering them less important than her spiritual practices. She often skipped meals during her prayer times and rarely exercised, believing these physical concerns were secondary to spiritual growth. But inspired by Pope John Paul II's example, she began to see caring for her body as a form of stewardship and gratitude to God. She started simple, eating regular nutritious meals, taking short walks, and ensuring adequate sleep. She approached these activities not as separate from her spiritual life, but as extensions of it, offering thanks for her body with each healthy choice. Within weeks, her energy improved, her chronic headaches diminished, and she found herself more present and effective in both her prayers and her work. The fourth error is spiritual isolation, attempting to grow in faith without community support. Pope John Paul II constantly emphasized the communal nature of faith. In his teachings, he reminded us that we are designed for communion with God and with one another. Isolation, even if motivated by sincere spiritual devotion, ultimately limits our growth and prosperity. Maria had been practicing her faith largely alone. While she attended services, she rarely connected deeply with others in her community. She saw her spiritual journey as a private matter between herself and God. But when she began participating more fully in her faith community, sharing her struggles and listening to others' experiences, something remarkable happened. Through these connections, she learned about financial management classes offered by her community center. She joined a walking group that supported her health goals while providing meaningful friendship. And when she faced a medical emergency, her new community rallied around her with practical support and encouragement. This network became a crucial foundation for her growing prosperity in all areas of life. As Pope John Paul II taught, no man is an island. Our prosperity, spiritual, financial, and physical, flourishes when we're connected to others who share our values and support our growth. Isolation might feel safer or more spiritually pure, but it often keeps us stuck in limiting patterns. The fifth and perhaps most significant spiritual mistake is failing to integrate all dimensions of life. Pope John Paul II was a remarkable example of someone who lived a fully integrated life. His spirituality informed his views on economics, health, politics, and culture. He saw no aspect of human existence as separate from spiritual concerns. In contrast, many of us keep different areas of our lives in separate compartments. We pray about some matters, but handle others through purely practical means. We might seek spiritual guidance for relationships, but rely solely on secular approaches to finances. This fragmentation prevents us from experiencing the holistic prosperity God intends for us. Maria had been praying about her health problems while trying to solve her financial issues through purely practical means, never bringing them before God or applying spiritual wisdom to her budget decisions. When she began integrating spiritual principles into all areas of her life, seeking wisdom for financial choices, blessing her food and exercise routines, and bringing her whole life before God, everything began to shift. The transformation wasn't instantaneous, but it was profound. Over the following year, Maria built a small emergency fund, developed healthier habits, formed meaningful community connections, and found greater purpose in her work. Her prosperity grew not just financially, but in every dimension, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. What Maria discovered through Pope John Paul II's teachings was that true prosperity isn't just about money in the bank. It's about alignment, bringing every aspect of our lives under spiritual guidance and eliminating the artificial divisions that block the flow of divine abundance. When we integrate our faith with our work, our attitude toward material goods, our physical health practices, our community connections, and all areas of life, we create channels through which prosperity can flow freely. These 5 spiritual mistakes, separating faith from work, misunderstanding material goods, neglecting physical health, remaining isolated, and failing to integrate all life dimensions, are subtle but powerful blockers to the prosperity God intends for us. Pope John Paul II's wisdom helps us identify and overcome these obstacles. His teachings remind us that prosperity isn't just financial success, but a harmonious, abundant life that honors God in every dimension. When we align our entire lives with spiritual principles, we often find that material prosperity follows. Naturally, not as the primary goal, but as one aspect of a life well lived. Maria's story might seem simple, but the principles she discovered are profound. By addressing these 5 spiritual mistakes, she didn't just improve her finances. She created a more integrated, peaceful, and abundant life. And the beautiful thing is, these same principles are available to each of us right now. As we conclude the first part of our exploration, I invite you to reflect on which of these spiritual mistakes might be affecting your own life. Are you separating your work from your faith? Do you have conflicted feelings about material prosperity? Are you neglecting your health in pursuit of spiritual growth? Have you become isolated in your spiritual journey? Or are you keeping different areas of your life in separate compartments? In our next segment, we'll explore practical steps to overcome each of these mistakes based on Pope John Paul II's teachings. We'll discover how small adjustments in your thinking and daily practices can open the flow of true prosperity in every dimension of your life. These insights have the power to transform not just your financial situation, but your entire approach to living a spiritually aligned and abundant life. The path to overcoming these spiritual obstacles begins with awareness, but it must continue with action. Pope John Paul II was a man who deeply understood the importance of practical application of spiritual principles. His life and teachings show us that faith without works remains incomplete. Let's explore how to practically address each of these 5 spiritual mistakes in our daily lives. These aren't complicated techniques requiring special knowledge. They're simple adjustments that anyone can implement, regardless of their current circumstances. To overcome the first mistake, separating faith from work, begin by bringing awareness to your workday. Many people rush through their mornings, arrive at work already stressed, and then wonder why they feel disconnected from their spiritual center. Pope John Paul II suggested that work should be approached as a collaboration with divine purpose. Start your workday with a brief moment of intention. Before entering your workplace, pause for just 30 seconds to remind yourself that your work has spiritual significance. This simple practice can transform even routine tasks into meaningful contributions. Whether you're preparing meals, managing finances, building homes, or caring for others, see your work as an expression of your spiritual values. Maria began implementing this practice by placing a small reminder on her desk, just a word or symbol that helped her reconnect with her spiritual purpose whenever work became challenging. She also started offering a brief prayer of gratitude at the end of each workday, acknowledging the opportunity to contribute through her labor. These small practices bridged the artificial gap between her faith and her work. For those who find their current work misaligned with their deepest values, Pope John Paul II's writings offer wisdom too. He understood that sometimes we must work in imperfect circumstances, but we can still bring dignity to our labor through our attitude and commitment to integrity. While seeking more aligned opportunities, we can find meaning in providing for ourselves and those who depend on us. The second mistake, misunderstanding material goods, requires a balanced perspective. Pope John Paul II taught neither attachment to wealth nor rejection of it, but rather proper stewardship of resources. Begin by examining your beliefs about money and prosperity. Do you subconsciously believe that financial struggles somehow make you more spiritual? Or conversely, do you place too much importance on material acquisition? A practical step toward balance is creating a simple budget that reflects your spiritual values. Allocate portions for necessities, savings, generosity, and yes, even enjoyment. Pope John Paul II recognized that responsible enjoyment of material goods can be a form of gratitude for God's provision. Maria found that when she established a modest giving practice, setting aside a small amount each month for someone in need, her anxiety about money paradoxically decreased. This regular practice reminded her that money was a tool for expressing her values, not a measure of her spiritual worth. She also began keeping a gratitude inventory, noting the material blessings she already enjoyed, rather than focusing solely on what she lacked. Addressing the third mistake, neglecting physical health, begins with recognizing our bodies as divine gifts, requiring stewardship. Pope John Paul II maintained physical activity throughout his life, even adapting his practices as his health changed with age. His example teaches us that caring for our physical bodies honors the Creator who designed them. Start with small, sustainable changes rather than dramatic overhauls that rarely last. Perhaps begin each day with 5 minutes of gentle stretching while offering gratitude for your body's abilities. Choose one nutritional improvement that you can maintain consistently. Perhaps adding a serving of vegetables to each meal or drinking more water throughout the day. Remember that sleep is also a spiritual discipline, not a luxury. Pope John Paul II understood the need for proper rest despite his demanding schedule, creating a simple evening ritual that helps you transition to restful sleep can be a spiritual practice that dramatically improves your health and effectiveness. Maria began by simply taking a 10-minute walk after dinner each evening, using this time for prayer and reflection. She also established a consistent sleep schedule, treating her bedtime as an important appointment rather than an afterthought. These small changes improved her energy levels and mental clarity, making her more effective in both her spiritual practices and her work. The fourth mistake, spiritual isolation, requires courage to overcome. We often remain isolated not from lack of opportunity, but from fear of vulnerability. Pope John Paul II was known for his genuine connections with people from all walks of life. He demonstrated that authentic community requires both giving and receiving. Begin by identifying one spiritual companion with whom you can be honest about your journey. This might be someone from your faith community, a trusted friend, or even a formal spiritual director. The key is finding someone who shares your fundamental values but can offer different perspectives when needed. Maria started by simply staying after services to join a coffee gathering she had previously rushed through. She later joined a small study group exploring Pope John Paul II's teachings. Through these connections, she not only gained practical wisdom about integrating faith with daily life, but also found encouragement during challenging times. Community also provides accountability for our growth. When Maria shared her financial goals with trusted friends, they helped her stay committed to her savings plan and celebrated her progress. This support made the journey toward prosperity feel less lonely and more attainable. The fifth spiritual mistake, failing to integrate all dimensions of life, is perhaps the most subtle but significant barrier to prosperity. Pope John Paul II's holistic approach to faith offers us a model for integration. He addressed matters of spirituality, economics, politics, culture, and personal development as interconnected aspects of human flourishing. Begin the integration process by examining the language you use about different areas of your life. Do you talk about spiritual matters as something separate from practical concerns? This linguistic division often reflects an internal fragmentation that blocks prosperity. Practice bringing your spiritual awareness to everyday decisions that might seem purely practical. When grocery shopping, can you express gratitude for the abundance available to you? When paying bills, can you acknowledge the services these payments represent rather than focusing solely on scarcity? When making health decisions, can you seek both practical wisdom and spiritual guidance? Maria began carrying a small journal where she noted insights about how her faith informed different areas of life. When making financial decisions, she would ask not just, "Can I afford this?" but "Does this purchase align with my deeper values?" When considering health choices, she reflected on how physical well-being supported her spiritual mission, rather than seeing them as competing priorities. This integration extends to our communication as well. Pope John Paul II spoke with consistency, whether addressing spiritual leaders, political figures, or ordinary people. Our integrity grows when we express the same values in our workplace, our home, our place of worship, and our community engagements. As you work to overcome these 5 spiritual mistakes, remember that prosperity flows into our lives gradually, not instantly. Pope John Paul II taught patience and persistence in spiritual growth. The transformation you seek may begin with small shifts in perspective that eventually create significant changes in your external circumstances. Maria's journey illustrates this gradual transformation. Within 6 months of applying these principles, she had established an emergency fund that reduced her financial anxiety. Her health had improved through consistent self-care practices. Her work had become more meaningful as she connected it to her spiritual values, and her community connections provided both support and opportunities she would never have discovered in isolation. But the most significant change was internal. Maria no longer experienced her life as fragmented between spiritual and practical concerns. She had begun living with greater integration, bringing spiritual awareness to every dimension of her existence. This internal alignment created external prosperity almost as a natural byproduct. Pope John Paul II understood that true prosperity isn't measured primarily by financial metrics, but by alignment with divine purpose. When we correct these 5 spiritual mistakes, we often discover that material prosperity follows, not because we're focusing on wealth acquisition, but because we're living in harmony with spiritual principles that naturally generate abundance. His teachings remind us that prosperity has multiple dimensions. Financial stability is one aspect, but so is physical well-being, meaningful work, authentic community, and spiritual peace. When these dimensions work in harmony rather than competition, we experience the fullness of life that faith promises. As we approach the conclusion of our exploration, consider which of these spiritual mistakes has most affected your own journey. Perhaps you've maintained artificial divisions between your faith and your work. Maybe you've held limiting beliefs about material prosperity that have kept you struggling unnecessarily. You might have neglected your physical health while focusing on spiritual disciplines, or isolated yourself from supportive community. Identifying your primary obstacle is the first step toward transformation. Then, select one small practice from those we've discussed to begin bridging the gap. Remember that significant change often begins with modest adjustments consistently applied over time. Pope John Paul II's wisdom offers us a path to prosperity that honors both our spiritual nature and our practical needs. His integrated approach reminds us that we need not choose between spiritual depth and material well-being. When properly understood, these dimensions support rather than contradict each other. The errors that block our prosperity are not usually dramatic missteps, but subtle misalignments in our thinking and practice. By addressing these 5 spiritual mistakes, separating faith from work, misunderstanding material goods, neglecting physical health, remaining isolated, and failing to integrate all dimensions of life, we open ourselves to the flow of divine abundance in all its forms. This understanding transforms not just our financial situation, but our entire experience of daily living. Work becomes meaningful contribution rather than mere obligation. Material resources become tools for expressing our highest values rather than sources of anxiety. Physical health practices become expressions of gratitude rather than burdensome requirements. Community connections become sources of wisdom and support rather than distractions from spiritual growth, and our fragmented existence becomes an integrated life of purpose and peace. In this integrated state, prosperity flows naturally, not because we're focusing on acquisition, but because we're aligning ourselves with divine principles that generate abundance. This is the wisdom Pope John Paul II offered throughout his pontificate, and it remains as relevant today as when he first shared it. As we conclude our exploration of these 5 spiritual mistakes that block prosperity, I invite you to reflect on which insight has most resonated with your current situation. What small step might you take today to begin correcting these errors in your own life? The path to greater prosperity in all its dimensions begins with this awareness and continues with consistent action aligned with your deepest values. The practical wisdom found in Pope John Paul II's teachings continues to transform lives around the world. In this final section, we'll explore how to sustain the prosperity that begins to flow when we correct these spiritual mistakes. We'll also address common challenges that arise on this journey and discover how to overcome them with grace and perseverance. Maintaining alignment between our spiritual values and daily practices requires ongoing attention. Pope John Paul II demonstrated this through his own life. Even as his responsibilities grew and his health declined, he remained committed to the integration of faith with every dimension of existence. This consistency is key to sustainable prosperity. One challenge many people face is the return of old patterns during times of stress. When pressure mounts, we often revert to familiar ways of thinking and acting, even if those patterns previously blocked our prosperity. Maria experienced this when a family emergency temporarily derailed her new financial practices and health routines. She found herself falling back into compartmentalized thinking, treating the crisis as solely a practical problem to solve. Pope John Paul II's writings offer wisdom for such moments. He understood that times of trial are not interruptions of our spiritual journey, but essential parts of it. In his apostolic letter, Salvifici Doloris, he explored the meaning of human suffering and its potential for spiritual growth. This perspective helps us maintain integration even when circumstances become difficult. When you face unexpected challenges, pause before reacting. Take just 30 seconds to reconnect with your spiritual center and remember that this situation, however practical it seems, has spiritual dimensions. Ask yourself, how can I respond to this challenge in a way that honors all aspects of my life? Spiritual, financial, physical, and relational. Maria learned to apply this pause during crises. When her mother was hospitalized, she initially abandoned all her new practices in the rush to help, but after a few overwhelmed days, she remembered to integrate her response. She maintained brief spiritual practices, even in the hospital waiting room, made financial decisions that reflected both urgency and wisdom, and remembered to eat properly and rest when possible. This integrated approach helped her navigate the crisis without losing the prosperity consciousness she had been cultivating. Another common challenge is the influence of people who don't share your integrated perspective. You may encounter friends, family members, or colleagues who maintain rigid divisions between spiritual matters and real-world concerns. Their compartmentalized thinking can inadvertently pull you back into the very patterns you're working to overcome. Pope John Paul II frequently engaged with people whose perspectives differed from his own, yet he maintained his integrated vision without becoming isolated or combative. He demonstrated that we can remain connected to others while holding firm to our own understanding of how faith informs all areas of life. When faced with compartmentalized thinking from others, practice compassionate clarity. Rather than arguing or withdrawing, simply continue living your integrated approach with consistency. When appropriate, share the benefits you've experienced from bringing spiritual awareness to practical matters, but do so as a personal testimony rather than a prescription for others. Maria found that some friends were puzzled by her new approach, particularly her practice of bringing spiritual reflection to financial decisions. Rather than trying to convince them, she simply shared how this integration had reduced her anxiety and improved her choices. Over time, several friends became curious about her approach as they witnessed the positive changes in her life. A third challenge involves maintaining patience during periods when external prosperity seems delayed despite internal alignment. Pope John Paul II recognized that spiritual growth rarely follows a linear path. There are seasons of visible progress and seasons of apparent stagnation, yet meaningful transformation continues beneath the surface. During periods when financial improvement, health recovery, or other external signs of prosperity seem slow, to manifest, focus on the internal harmony you're developing. Prosperity begins with alignment, even before circumstances visibly change. Maintain your integrated practices, not primarily to achieve external results, but because they represent a more truthful way of living. Maria experienced a period of several months when her financial situation remained challenging, despite her faithful application of these principles. During this time, she focused on the peace she was developing through her integrated approach, rather than becoming discouraged by the pace of external change. She continued her practices not just as means to an end, but as expressions of her deepest values. Interestingly, during this apparent plateau in financial prosperity, she noticed growth in other dimensions. particularly in her sense of purpose and her community connections. By maintaining her integrated approach despite delayed external results, she positioned herself for the more substantial financial breakthrough that eventually came through an unexpected job opportunity. Pope John Paul II also understood the importance of celebration in sustaining spiritual growth. When we acknowledge progress, however modest, we strengthen our commitment to continued integration. Take time to recognize how far you've come in addressing these 5 spiritual mistakes. Celebrate not just financial improvements, but growth in all dimensions. Greater peace, more meaningful work, improved health, deeper relationships, and spiritual vitality. Maria established a monthly practice of reflection, noting areas of growth and expressing gratitude for progress. This simple practice helped her maintain momentum even during challenging periods. She celebrated small victories, a modest increase in savings, improved energy levels, deeper connections with friends, or moments of alignment between her faith and her daily decisions. As your prosperity grows through this integrated approach, you'll likely discover a desire to share these principles with others who struggle with the same spiritual mistakes. Pope John Paul II was a masterful teacher who shared wisdom through both words and example. His life demonstrates that the most effective teaching comes through authentic living rather than mere instruction. As you overcome these spiritual blocks to prosperity, allow your life to become a quiet testimony to the power of integration. Share insights when appropriate, but recognize that your consistent example will speak more convincingly than any argument. People who observe your peaceful approach to finances, your respect for physical well-being, your meaningful work, and your supportive community connections will naturally become curious about the principles behind these changes. Maria eventually began mentoring a younger woman who was struggling with the same disconnection between faith and finances that had once limited her own prosperity. Rather than offering abstract advice, Maria simply invited her to participate in practical activities, creating a values-based budget, joining community gatherings, and establishing simple rituals that brought spiritual awareness to daily decisions. This experiential sharing proved far more effective than theoretical instruction would have been. One final insight from Pope John Paul II's teachings concerns the ultimate purpose of prosperity. He consistently taught that abundance in any dimension, spiritual, financial, physical, or relational, is never meant solely for personal benefit. True prosperity overflows into generosity and service to others. As you experience greater integration and the prosperity that follows, look for ways to extend these blessings to others. This might involve financial generosity as resources increase, but it could also mean sharing your time, wisdom, skills, or simply your presence with those who could benefit. This outward focus prevents prosperity from becoming self-centered and maintains the flow of abundance in your life. Maria discovered that as her financial situation stabilized, she found joy in helping others navigate their own paths to integrated prosperity. She volunteered at her community center's financial literacy program, bringing her unique perspective on the connection between spiritual values and practical money management. This generosity didn't diminish her prosperity, but rather enhanced it through deepened purpose and expanded relationships. Pope John Paul II's wisdom offers us a path to prosperity that honors our full humanity: spiritual and material, individual and communal, practical and transcendent. By addressing these 5 spiritual mistakes that block abundance, we create space for prosperity to flow into every dimension of our lives. True prosperity isn't just about accumulating resources, but about living in alignment with divine principles. When we integrate our faith with our work, understand material goods properly, honor our physical health, engage in supportive community, and bring spiritual awareness to every area of life, we experience the abundant life we were designed to enjoy. This journey toward integrated prosperity isn't always easy or quick, but it leads to a depth of fulfillment that fragmented living can never provide. As Pope John Paul II demonstrated through his own remarkable life, authentic prosperity comes not from separating spiritual concerns from practical matters, but from seeing them as aspects of one harmonious whole. As you continue applying these principles in your own life, remember that small, consistent adjustments often lead to profound transformation over time. Be patient with yourself when old patterns temporarily resurface. Celebrate progress in all dimensions, not just financial improvement, and allow your growing prosperity to overflow in generosity toward others. The path Pope John Paul II illuminated remains available to each of us today. By correcting these 5 spiritual mistakes, we open ourselves to the multi-dimensional prosperity that comes from living in harmony with divine principles. This is the abundant life, not perfect or free from challenges, but rich with meaning, purpose, peace, and yes, even material sufficiency. May your journey toward integrated prosperity bring blessing not only to your own life, but to everyone your life touches. This, after all, is the ultimate measure of true abundance. Not what we accumulate, but how our prosperity creates ripples of blessing in an ever-widening circle around us. This is the legacy Pope John Paul II left us, and it's available to each of us who chooses the path of spiritual integration.